Hi, welcome to Breath, the New Science of a Lost Art Expert Q&A. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Jill Miller. She is an author and instructor, a renowned expert in fascia, posture, and breathing. She studied anatomy and movement for more than 30 years, and her programs on self-care and posture are taught at hundreds of schools, clinics, and used by numerous professional sports teams around the world. The first question I have for Jill is, what the heck does posture have to do with breathing, and what does breathing have to do with posture?
Great question. You can think of your breathing muscles like the lining of your birthday suit. Breathing is such a prime movement for our body and for our ability to live. And most of these breathing muscles have dual functions. They play a postural role, and they also play this respiratory role. And then some of them, like the diaphragm, are not just two-timers. They're like quintuple timers. They do so many different systemic things for us. So for example, the diaphragm helps us with our upright posture. It helps us with breathing. We know that its movements help with digestion, also helps with movement of blood and lymph. So our breathing muscles are intricately tied to so many different systems of the body. But what I find very interesting is how your posture can alter over time the length-tension relationship, the optimal length-tension relationship, meaning how well a muscle can both lengthen and contract from a normal or from a baseline, how it can shift over time because of how you wear your own body and how you wear your breath, and how essentially it can wear you out. Because if the length-tension relationships from skull to pelvis are somewhat imbalanced, eventually that can wear down your joints. And so while you can get away with it for a really long time, and also, by the way, you can live with arthritic joints and disc bulges and all sorts of interesting MRI readings and have no pain, have no experience of pain. But what you've done over time, potentially, is reduce the options of your range of motion, both with breathing and with your overall mobility. So these things are intricately tied together, and there are ways for sure to try to improve or alter or influence the health, the musculoskeletal health of these tissues.
So what do I do first if I want to improve my breathing and improve my posture? Do I begin by breathing correctly, or do I begin by sitting up in a way that will allow for proper breathing?
Okay. So yes, yes and no. The test is actually just trying to sit. Now, by the way, breathing happens no matter what position you're in. You go to any opera, or if anyone is going to opera these days, but if you've ever seen an opera singer, they can get notes out in the most dysfunctional positions. You would never think that you could get this unbelievable resonance while your body is so contorted. Your respiratory muscles are so malleable that they can produce volume and frequency and beauty in some of the most awkward shapes imaginable. So this, the bias of the perfectly erect spine as being the ideal for respiration is a position. It's one of those positions, but there are also thousands of other positions you want to be able to have breath function. However, if you can't have that sort of neutral spine, that spine is like I have my skeleton buddy, his name is Osteo, in the background here, and you actually can't really see his skeleton or his spine all that well, but our skeleton, our spine is a wave form. And there's an undulation, a natural undulation to the spine. And so we have this balance of curves from our neck curve, our thoracic curve, our lumbar curve, and our sacrum. And this balance of curves really helps the respiratory muscles, the diaphragm, the intercostals, the tails of the diaphragm, and all the myofascial tissues that connect to have that ideal length-tension relationship. So we do want to try to figure out, well, what is our center? What is our most centered posture? Now, when you sit up and you start to ache, your back starts to ache, your neck starts to ache, your shoulders start to ache, something starts to spasm in your body while you're trying to hold this upright position, that's a tell. it's a red flag that's telling you there's probably some overwork happening. Overwork is going to lead to sympathetic tone, high sympathetic tone, which is going to be paradoxically impacting your ability to get full range of motion in your respiration. And so because it's so uncomfortable for so many people to sit upright, that's where influencing those tissues and joints that's kind of the role I play in the space. I help people to figure out which of these tissues are overworking and how you can then use pressure using a variety of different tools. I personally use soft, pliable balls called role model balls to try to nestle into the different tissues that tend to take over, right? So like, for example, the upper traps. This is a really easy target. When people are taking full, what I call abdominal thoracic breaths, where the diaphragm first descends and then it flattens as the ribs enlarge. This is going to give you your biggest lung volume. A lot of times what happens is you're trying to get the last like 3 cubic centimeters of air into the upper lungs. And so you'll start to do something like this. And so the shoulders will continually overwork. These what I call the stress muscles of respiration will take over our clavicular muscles. These are our emergency muscles, which we do need. If we hear a shot fired, that makes perfect sense. But for calm, meditative respiration, or to use a breath practice as meditation, it's really unhelpful to recruit muscles like this. And so, you know, one of the things that I do is I will use a yoga tune-up ball and I'll press it against the shoulder and lean against the wall or a corner and do full range of motion breaths where I can feel the first and second ribs actually mushing or lifting up into the ball, but not allowing my traps to be the thing that gives me a fake upper limit breath. Does that make sense?
It does, but why not breathe like that? Is that putting you in a sympathetic, stressful state? Why not have that extra movement?
You absolutely need that movement. And if you didn't have the resilience of that movement, when an emergency did happen, you could get stuck there because your nervous system and your central nervous system doesn't know that it can now let it go. So yes, we do need to train all of the tissues, but the thing is most people, James, because I hate to use the most people clauses, but because the dominance of our work culture is here, where we are screen focused or we are small screen focused and we have narrow focusing, our eyes are pulling our heads and necks forward. And this is a well-documented syndrome, the forward head on neck issue. But what that does to your traps is it makes your traps a chronic, in a chronic tension position that puts us into the cast or to shape of a stress breather day in and day out when it's not functional for us. Does that make sense? So even I'm going to go into fascia mechanics here for a second. Even holding your phone, right? You can imagine me holding the phone, and I'm going to hold my phone. This doesn't weigh a lot, but for 5 hours a day, if I'm clutching this position, that low load over time builds a tension pattern that goes from my hands, the connective tissue in my hands, which strings all the way up through the forearms, through the elbow, through the shoulder, right up into the neck and jaw, and into the eye. And so we have these common tension patterns that are actually really easy to address through self-care and through self-therapy that are impacting our breathing, because this same chain of tissues is that emergency, that sort of breath of last resort. And want to make that our first resort. And so that also comes with awareness of how you're breathing in context of dealing with, your work environment. But also we can address it and we can reverse engineer the tension patterns that we create day in and day out. Just like you brush and floss your teeth, brushing and flossing using movement, awareness, soft tissue tools can help to alter that chronic tension pattern, which is how you make your money. I mean, you're going to go for it. That's what I'm going to go for.
So what can we do beyond not looking at our phones for 5 hours a day like this, which seems like a bad idea no matter how you cut it? Is there any specific for the people who do need to look at their phones quite often? Is there any posture that is conducive to healthy breathing and looking at your phone?
Oh, wow. Is there any posture that's conducive to looking at your phone? You can try to work your position so that your phone is more at eye level, but you can also see that I'm going to bear a heavy cost on my anterior delt. I'm going to need my serratus to support it. So yeah, with the long answer is that we want to be aware of our posture while we're holding phones or while we're using our machinery, just like you would if you were a barista or whether you were, digging or jackhammering. We just have to want to be aware of the sort of ergonomics, but to spend time to de-recruit those tissues. And by de-recruiting it, you want to enter into a parasympathetic state, which is key, by the way, because therapy is very restorational. When we go into a parasympathetic state, it tends to stick when we enter into that state. And entering into that state, you kind of need your breath to help you with it. I mean, breath is one of the virtues that gets you into a parasympathetic state. There are other things that can help you to what I call turn on your off switch. And that includes position, your relationship to gravity. It also includes mindset, willing to host a body that is going into relaxation, because relaxation can make us extremely vulnerable and it can be a frightening place for many of us to go. For many of us, when we relax deeply, that's when our anxiety spikes. And also, of course, doing breathing practices that emphasize the cycle of exhale and the pause after exhale in a longer duration than your inhale and then pause after inhale. So one of the things I really recommend is getting down on the ground. Getting down on the ground, and if you'd like me to demonstrate anything, I can get down on the ground and show people. But I think for many people, upright breathing creates a lot of physical stress. And so those physical stressors have to be dealt with. Ultimately, proper muscle training to strengthen back muscles correctly is going to be helpful if you want to do an upright seated breath practice. I mostly practice on the ground. I find I get more out of the parasympathetic virtues, and I can sustain my parasympathetic state longer on the ground than I can upright.
For us office jockeys, though, when we're sitting in front of a computer all day, which is what so many of us are doing, do you have any recommendations on posture and breathing for someone like me who's sitting in this chair all day long?
Yes. So I'm going to put my hair up and I'm going to show you something that anybody who's facing us right now can easily do. This is something that I do with a tool called the Quadratus ball. You can do with your palm of your hand. So I'll show you both things. And what this does is it massages and maneuvers anterior neck muscles, and it maneuvers something called the carotid sheath. And within the carotid sheath is something called your vagus nerve. And when it is stimulated, it will immediately slow down your heart rate and also slow down your breath rate. And so what you'll do is, I'm going to mirror you. This is left hand is up, and you place it on the right side of your neck. Okay? And so you're going to have five fingers together like this. There you go. And the heel of your hand is going to lightly rest on your throat. And the idea is to sweep the soft tissue towards your right ear while you rotate your head in the opposite direction. So you're creating a friction of your jowls with the skin, and something underneath that's called the superficial fascia. That's our our fatty layer. And then deep to that is a muscle called the platysma. And then deep to that is some deep fascia that's covering the famous scalenes. And of course, you're also maneuvering a muscle called the sternocleidomastoid. So you can do that several times and then switch sides. Now, one shoulder or one arm, if you're doing this with your hand, it's not quite as comfortable as if you're doing with the ball. I'll show you what it looks like if you have a kid's ball in your house. This can even be done with a sports ball, but you don't want to press deeply. So this is called the Quadratus ball. It's an inflated, grippy, air-filled ball, also known as a Gertie ball. So you just stick it on the front of your throat. And what I do is I twist the ball so that oh, you have a beard. Okay, so your beard is going to limit some of the friction. But you want to rotate your head in the opposite direction as you move the ball towards the back of your neck. And then you can flip directions. So I go from side to side here, essentially shaving these soft tissues. And what this also does, James, is it massages the anterior neck muscles. So there's some tiny muscles behind your larynx, behind your esophagus, behind your trachea, called the longi coli and longus capitis. And those muscles get very short and tight from being in that sort of leaning towards the screen all day. And so while I mentioned the carotid sheath, there are many layers that are being impacted here. So now you actually have a window where there's more length available here. And so a strengthening thing that you can do to now maintain this length is to just simply bring your hands behind your head. This is sort of an old classic. And you want to try to push your head forward with your hands, but the head refuses and it pushes back into the hands, really until you feel a shake. And so you want to think of your chin coming in towards your throat, and you want to push head into hands and hands into head, and neither win. So this is what reminds me of my old, when I grew up, we had a Volvo. And back in the day, Volvo car seats, they went straight up. They didn't push your head here. Do you remember old-fashioned car seats? So you want to push your head into the old-fashioned car seat here.
I have a very old car, so I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So much better ergonomically, but the newer car seats prevent whiplash because you're already forward, so you're not going to have that horrible extension moment. So then you can just try and rotate your head now and just notice if there's any difference in the way your neck feels. So this is just a quick, like, at the screen thing that you can do. We didn't do a check-in before, but check-ins that you can do beforehand would be the rotation that James is doing, or you can even check in by opening and closing your jaw. Because the muscle that crosses across the neck that we were massaging, or one of the muscles, the platysma, it starts at the base of your jaw, and then it feathers over the front of the neck, and then it trickles across the collarbones. And it's referred to as the creature of the Black Lagoon muscle. It's this muscle there. But if you have a lot of tension in it, it's going to prevent your jaw from opening and closing, which obviously is so important for, if we think about your book, is what Dr. Mew, or the mewing process, right? The chewing. So that's just one thing for your, not only your cervical spine, but also to attenuate stress. So anything that you can do to bias yourself away from that sort of chronic sympathetic arousal into a more parasympathetic state. I mean, we're not saying you're not all the way in the basement of parasympathy, but at least you're not as piped up as you were. And so that's just one thing. But there are other zones of respiration that have such a profound impact on your posture. And one of the places that I spend a lot of time instructing my clients is the rib cage, the thorax, because there's so many places that are controlling breathing. You have back muscles, you have rib muscles, you have the diaphragm. And of course, your lungs are in there, which is really important. And the pleura, the connective tissue around the lungs, and the amount of slipitude. That's a fascia term. It's not, but it is. The amount of slipitude that you have in and amongst the fascial tissues connecting lungs to periphery. So one of the things that I'd like to show with that, see if I can angle my camera down. And this is something you can do sort of seated at your desk, but you're not going to get the benefits of gravity if you're at a desk. It's best if you go down onto the ground. And so what I like to do is use a block for my head. And if you don't have a Courgeous ball, the other thing that works really well, I have found, to do what we're about to do, is a rolled up yoga mat. Because a rolled up yoga mat, most people have some type of exercise mat at home. The yoga mat has give, and it also has a lot of grip. And that's really what you're looking for here. The grip is very beneficial for exciting certain sensory neurons within your fascia. I don't want to bore you with all the proprioception and interoception talk. The other thing is you can use like a pillow. So this is a yoga bolster, but you can also use a bed pillow or a decorative pillow to do the same. And so this really helps the upper back, and it also helps with breathing. And so what you do is you put the Quadratus ball or whatever thing you have on the side of your ribs and let your head rest on the ground. And so what this is doing is it's overpressing or overpressurizing this sort of pack of ribs. Now, my Quadratus ball right now is touching probably 5 ribs. You have 12, and you'll probably want to manipulate as many as you can. So you would start here, maybe we go a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher, but we have other ways of affecting other ribs. You can really address every single one of the oars of your ribs. Think about it. You have 24 oars that are steering breathing, and sometimes your oars are at odds with each other. And so this is a way to sort of get them rowing the same boat, which is you and your life. So you can take your other hand, if you have the range of motion to do this. So not all people can actually reach their other set of ribs. And if that's the case, you can always smush by using a second pillow and just laying like that. And that way you really have this amazing bear hug, which also is extremely therapeutically nurturing to your nervous system. The body loves bear hugs, just like you like to be swaddled as a child. So this replicates the swaddle effect, which again is going to give a vagus system or a vagus nerve stimulation. And we want that. We want the parasympathetic to turn on while we're doing our breath practice in order to improve posture in this context. Okay, so you have your pillow there. Now I'll show you the exercise. If your hand is on the thing, you overpress the top hand too. Then you breathe exclusively into the ribs. Try to puff them as big as you can, hold your breath, and then activate, tension the position. So it's as if you're freezing your ribs open in the barrel chest shape, and then exhale through your nose, and then overpress so that you close both hemispheres of the ribs at once. And this is going to actually squash your diaphragm. It's going to really parachute up. Then breathe in. Make it difficult to breathe in. Barrel chest the ribs. Hold your breath. Contract the muscles within your rib cage. Those are the intercostals, internal, external intercostals, even erector spinae I'm contracting here, even my pecs. And then exhale. Get rid of the air. Help yourself get rid of the air. And so going through that pumping action of manipulating the ribs in upward rotation and downward rotation and giving them a little feedback with your hand or with a ball or the yoga mat or what have you, what you'll find after that is that range of motion breathing is much easier. And miraculously, you might have toggled around enough with the rotation that some of your back muscles no longer have to have an imposter syndrome of being a breath muscle for you. So this gets us closer to the lining of our birthday suit doing its best action and not having compensators try to help get breath into your body, right? So that is, so I showed you, I call this zone 3 breathing, by the way. The rib cage, I call that zone 2 breathing. And then I can elaborate into zone 1, which is a whole other world of movement and being.
One question for another question for office workers is that head posture out like this, which you see all the time. Yeah. Is there any specific recommendation you would give for people to first start off trying to improve their posture so that they can improve their breathing from there?
Yeah, so that first, that action. Second would be to strengthen the posterior neck muscles. You want me to show you another exercise for them?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this one, it usually pisses people off because I have an impossible range of motion, James. Just so you know, I am of the hypermobile type, and I don't want that to distract or distress anybody from trying these exercises because you really want to meet your structure where it is and obviously not push beyond a level of comfort. But it's a very simple exercise called wall angels. And it's not necessarily going to feel angelic when you first learn it. It might feel a little bit more demonic. But this can also be done on the ground. So just know that by the way, who's in an office right now anyway? We're all at our houses, so you can get down on the floor and try this probably. Very few people are working in offices. But it's nice to try this on a wall and then to also try it on the ground. And so for the wall angels, you can't do this with me. I see you have a bookcase behind you. It will be very uncomfortable for you. What you want to try to do is, my feet are just a couple inches away from the wall, and I'm placing my sacrum on the wall, and I'm placing the middle of my thoracic spine, the outward curve of the rib cage on the wall. I'm not trying to push my lumbar spine against the wall. So hopefully you can see I'm not tucking my tail under, but I'm going to try to honor the waveform of the spine. So you have sacrum, thorax, back of skull on the wall. And so that's the part that for many of you might be challenging, because you have to recruit correctly both the front of the neck muscles and the back of the neck muscles. My head is in the bottom of a nod. So I'm actually trying to think about bringing my jaw into my trachea, if we're going to talk breath anatomy. So almost think of bringing the tubes in towards the front of your skull. So you have this awkward looking position. Make sure that no other adults are seeing you, because they're going to think you look kind of weird here. Rib cage against the wall, sacrum against the wall, back of the skull against the wall. Now, your arms come out into this position. So they make not the goalpost, but the fin position. So I'm externally rotating. This is a position known to the humorists as external rotation. And I'm trying to pin the back of the forearms, the back of the hands, the back of the wrists, and the elbows on the wall, while maintaining the head, the rib cage, and the sacrum. So this is a whole upper body postural position, right? So this is an isometric. Now to upgrade this, to make it even more challenging, what you would do is start to fly your little wings up and down, but still paying intense attention to the relationship between the sacrum, the rib cage, and the skull. So I don't change the position of those primal organizing muscles. I inhale as I go overhead and exhale as I come down. Now the last piece of this involves the full rotation of the head. So you maintain all of those things, and then you'll rotate your head as your arms come overhead. But the trick here, as you rotate, is to not just twist and let your nose fall over towards your armpit, but it's to twist the head and draw it back against that old-fashioned car seat. So basically what I'm saying is you want to try to keep your skull on axis as you rotate it, which means that as I rotate, I don't just turn to the side, I have to still keep my jaw in, and I'm doing what's called retraction of the skull. So the skull continually applies pressure against the wall. So that is, that's just kind of like corrective exercise 101 and 102 for the head and neck. But the thing is, the neck, with you staying at the computer, isn't going to change unless you get the shifts further down the tree. And so breathing lower in your body is critical. If you keep returning to sort of that stress breath position, your neck is not going to be able to maintain, you're not going to be able to keep your head on your body. Your head is just going to keep cascading forward like it's at the end of a fishing pole. And so it's crucial to really address the roots. And that's why doing zone 1 breaths and manipulating tissues in zone 1 and zone 2 are going to help with the manifestation of not having a zone 3 breath be your dominant breath pattern.
If there were one other piece of advice you would offer to office monkeys, computer jockeys, whatever you want to call them, what would it be? Both those exercises are fantastic. I can feel some very dramatic changes in the tension in my neck just from doing that for a couple of minutes. So is there anything else that you would recommend people do who are sitting in front of Zoom calls all day like we are?
Yes. I would for breathing health and postural health, you got to get down into the gut area and address some key muscles, key connections of the diaphragm to the things that it connects with below. I think I might have sent you a blog. I did a blog that did a really almost, I think it's like an 8-minute anatomy illustration of how the diaphragm is fascially connected to the things below it, all the way to the pelvic floor, and the things above it, all the way into the jaw. And once you understand the map of the diaphragm and the roads it travels in your body tensionally, I think it's extremely motivating to anybody who starts to understand the anatomy to do something about it. And to develop perception of it. So, because the diaphragm, just tangent for a second, your diaphragm doesn't want you to know that it's there. It is peppered with virtually no sensory neurons that give you a sense of its place. So you can't actually know how far it's descending or how far it's ascending in and of itself. It's not going to give you that feedback. The only way you can determine that is by its fascial connections to all the things that it connects to. So the process of embodying breathing, the process of embodying breath is familiarizing yourself with its friends and neighbors. And that's a process-based thing. This is not like results-oriented stuff. Breath work is never results-oriented. And then, of course, anatomy is an endless process. I'm a process-based person. I love the learning of it. Okay, so I'm going to show you something that helps very simply to release and relieve stress. Let me get to my skeleton real quick on something called the Quadratus lumborum and the Psoas. So, by the way, these are 2 deflated Corgus balls that I have inside of osteo, like 2 hemispheres of the diaphragm. And just to simplify, the diaphragm lives inside of the lower 6 ribs, but it also has tails that attach to the lumbar spine. And as the back of the diaphragm wraps around to attach to the lumbar spine, it crosses across 2 major muscles. One of them is a very important low back muscle called the Quadratus lumborum, which I've got here in blue, connects the 12th rib to your pelvic bone. And then the other muscle that's very important, and you might have heard of it, is the psoas. And that is considered one of our chief walking muscles. And so this is how you know how walking is connected to breathing, because the fascial relationship between the psoas and the diaphragm is everything. If your hip doesn't move well, it's going to create chronic tension, shortening of tissues connecting into the diaphragm. And then your diaphragm will be pulled down towards that hip, and it won't have the elasticity, that length tension relationship that I mentioned at the very beginning. And so a really elegant and easy way to meet that, and to also then meet the other tissues that the diaphragm is connected to, namely your transversus abdominis, which people hold tight to look skinny all the time, really bad idea for respiration, is to do something very similar that we did with the ribs. You can place the rolled up yoga mat, a rolled up towel, a couch pillow underneath your waist, underneath the side of your waist. And this will create really a traction between the bony chunk of your pelvis and the bony chunk of your rib cage, and very gently elongate the tissues between them, which include the Quadratus lumborum and the psoas. And so the attenuation, or the mode of adapting to this very strange sensation, is doing a similar breath pattern that we did before, which is an inhale, trying to feel the side of your waist moving into the Corgus ball. Then you hold your breath temporarily, and then you create tension. So you freeze the shape of your sort of bloated abdomen, and then you exhale slowly and let the tissues mold in and mold around the ball. And then you breathe in again, Hold your breath, create tension, and then exhale, slowly release. And by the way, you would want to do this for anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes per side. I only gave you a 2-breath rep demonstration, but parasympathetic dominance and tissue compliance takes time. Muscle contraction happens very rapidly, but the opposite doesn't really, because our bodies are filled with what's known as unconscious muscle bracing. It's at a set tension placement, and that's really generated by our central nervous system's determination of how much we need to steel ourselves to get through the day, through our environment, or whatever our internal emotional state is telling us. And so this is a process of working with your body rather than against the body. Putting the ball there isn't going to get rid of tension. You have to meet your tension, you have to breathe, be willing to sense, and be willing to really feel at a very deep, subtle level. And that takes many, many minutes, and it takes a lot of patience, but it is a worthy pursuit, because that will alter, I promise you, I work with hundreds of thousands of people, that will alter that unconscious bracing that you had no idea that you were even carrying around that extra weight within you.
If there were 3 very quick takeaways, 3 very quick bullet points you could offer people about posture and breathing, little hints, what would they be?
Three hints.
You're a process person, so that is not a fair question. But
Oh, not fair. Somewhere a long time ago, I read a quote that said, "Your posture follows you like a shadow." Maybe it was Feldenkrais. But, you know, your breath is the conversation within that shadow. And so to be privy to a secretive conversation, you have to get quiet to notice things.
everyone, sit up straight, don't force it, breathe well, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.